One concept I've been thinking quite a bit about recently is bridges, building bridges, conceptual bridges, bridges between differences in people. An arc, a curve between a gap, like a spark that crosses between anode to cathode. And that space in between, that distance, that is where the spark occurs. If that gap wasn't there wouldn't be a spark. It wouldn't have a collector for the universal power. This universe, this planet, we live literally on a battery. It's energy all over the place. We are electrical beings. Free energy is a given. Everywhere there's free energy. We get sold the idea that resources are created by the companies that supply them, like water, a water company. Water company doesn't make water. Same as an electricity company, it doesn't make the fuel that makes the electricity. It all comes from the earth. The resources don't belong to anybody. They belong to everybody and everything. And so just in our mentalities, just in our ideas, in our worldview, there's a few flaws in the thinking, a few detrimental ideas. If we knew where we stood and what life was all about, and who owns the nature, who owns God, who owns the planet, who owns all of these things that we're presented with, when we can work out that nobody owns anything, really, that the best you can do is own title to something, the name, the word of it. It's like, for example, you make yourself like a puppet, a little rag doll with a smiley face and everything, and it's a rag doll, and somebody comes along and says, "Oh, I like your rag doll, have you got a name?" And you say, "Oh no, I ain't got a name for it, it's me rag doll." And they say, "Oh, it's Jimmy, I'll call it Jimmy." And then because they gave it the title, does it belong to them? No. Anybody can stick a label on anything and then claim it's theirs. And then if nobody else comes along and says, "Well, no, I actually claimed it first and it wasn't mine," it never became mine. Once we start to get those concepts, then we can return to some kind of like logical balance. But when we live in a world where we think there's people who are higher and people who are lower, then we've got the wrong concept anyway. Honestly, people, there is no such thing as higher and lower. You might cook up some ideas of how authorities got power, but it's like the idea that somebody's like 6 foot tall is more powerful than somebody who's 4 foot tall or 2 foot tall. It's utter rubbish, It's kind of racism and sizeism and statism all over again when we start picking on individual traits as based on power or prestige or any kind of virtues like that. You could get a 3-year-old little girl with a sawn-off shotgun can do as much damage as anybody else, But when we're talking about protection, the ability to protect people, for example, I'm a man and I can pick up most women, and probably the women when they're holding a child. I can actually physically lift that woman up, whereas a woman has a very difficult problem of picking a man up. But a woman can do just as much damage to a man as a man can do to a woman, because force comes in the way of knives and guns and plates and bottles and chairs. You're not, just because you're like 6'6" or whatever, you're not protected by your size, but you've got more chance of protecting others with your size. just through protection, not defence or attack or any of that, but just simply if there was a fire and somebody had broken the leg, if you're a man, you've got much more chance of picking that person up and protecting women, So where am I going with this? Well, basically, men are there to as protectors, not attackers. We've been given this role of men are from Mars, women are from Venus, and all of this. Like we are the aggressors, but no, we are the protectors. You'll find that a man can die just as easily as a woman, of heartache or of a physical attack. And so, like I say, once we get these concepts right, in my opinion, we can start to build bridges. When women accept that men are men and men accept that women are women, and we can't create that kind of equality, then we can build a bridge with our differences. We don't want to just cement over the path and make everything level. Men and women are just different, and I won't treat a woman like a man. I refuse. So, that's the last thing I'd ever do on this planet, is treat people equally. I know people mean it differently, but it literally gets mixed up. Nut and a bolt isn't the same thing. Same as different cultures and different types of people in different workplaces. Different. We're different. We're all different. And if you break it down, every individual on this planet, be it man, woman, or whatever, wants to be different from each other. I don't see myself as all men. And I don't think any man really wants to group with other men and make group decisions as a man, really. I think, that's the kind of thing that a community can do, a tribe, for the good of the tribe. But essentially a man needs his own, to be self-willed. And if he's not allowed that self-will, and he's not allowed to protect his family, then things go badly wrong. There's basically then no use for that man in society. He's just basically a money maker and somebody to take the rubbish out, and occasional sperm donor. And again, we need to build these bridges. We need to build these bridges between differences. We see it that we have a lot of problem with police, police brutality. Again, a man has no more rights to protect his family. He hasn't got a right to a weapon. He hasn't got rights to protect his family beyond all means. The police have more right to go and protect someone else's family. So again, we've got this disparity, this inequality, where men are not allowed to be men anymore. And I'm not just talking about men, but I am a man, so I can see that very clearly. I know that we live in a world that's everything's like shrink wrapped and packed and packaged nicely, and I think that the system tries to capitalise on the weakness of the woman, to like pretty things and to make life pretty and that. And it's very easy for an advertising company or any company to just make a product look pretty, and a man may see the dangers in that product, whereas a woman will just maybe see it differently. She'll see the advantage to the other people, to the tribe, to the family, And so again, differences, people shouldn't be expected to see everything different, everything the same, Just because somebody's very pessimistic or optimistic doesn't mean to say that it's out of line. But again, if you're a pessimist and you're always talking negatively about everything, you're going to have to build a bridge too. We're going to have to find some kind of balance. I'm not talking about equality, if we're sitting on a seesaw and a woman, a child on one end and a man on the other, maybe it balances out. Bridges, yeah, just a few thoughts anyway, okay. I'll leave it there. Cheerio.